The news arrived with a calculated quiet, a stark contrast to the decades of turmoil it purported to resolve. Yesterday, on the 22nd of May 2025, the United Kingdom, under Prime Minister Keir Starmer, formally signed an agreement. This document, years in the making, transfers sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. This archipelago, a scatter of coral atolls in the vast Indian Ocean, has long been a bleeding wound of colonial history. The islands, including the strategically vital Diego Garcia, are now, on paper at least, Mauritian. The ink is dry, but the stains of the past are not so easily erased, nor are the questions about what this truly means for those whose lives were stolen. This transfer is no simple handover. It is a complex arrangement, a tapestry woven with threads of geopolitical strategy, financial obligation, and the ever-present shadow of past injustices. The British government, so long intransigent, so long dismissive of international law and human suffering, has finally conceded. But this concession comes with strings, thick ropes, designed to maintain a tight grip on what truly matters to the powerful, the military base. The flag may change, but the purpose, the cold strategic utility of these islands seems set to endure, a familiar pattern in the long game of empires and their modern-day successors. The carefully worded statements from Downing Street speak of pragmatism, of securing national interests, yet for the Chagossian people, forcibly expelled from their homes more than half a century ago, these words ring hollow. Their homeland, a place of memory and belonging, has been bartered once more. The announcement, though anticipated by some after terms were initially agreed in October 2024, still landed with the force of a final betrayal for many. The complexities of a 99-year lease, the financial figures bandied about, do little to soothe the ache of displacement, the longing for a return that remains uncertain, perhaps even more remote. Prime Minister Starmer and his Mauritian counterpart Navin Chandra Ramgoolam presented this as a landmark accord, a new chapter. The negotiations, it is said, were protracted, particularly after a change in Mauritian leadership necessitated further discussions over 6 crucial months leading up to yesterday's signing. But what kind of chapter is it? Is it one of genuine reconciliation and justice, or merely a recalibration of colonial power dynamics, a sophisticated repackaging of an old wrong? The people who were so brutally uprooted, the true custodians of these islands, remain largely on the periphery, their voices a faint whisper against the roar of statecraft. At the heart of this intricate deal lies Diego Garcia, the largest atoll in the Chagos Archipelago. This is no idyllic, forgotten island. It is a formidable military installation, a linchpin of American and British strategic operations across vast swathes of the globe. Its importance cannot be overstated. For decades it has served as a launchpad for power projection, a silent, ever-watchful sentinel in the Indian Ocean. From this remote outpost, bombers have flown, drones have been guided, and surveillance operations have been meticulously conducted, far from public scrutiny and democratic oversight. Its very existence is a testament to the enduring logic of imperial reach. The base's utility has been repeatedly demonstrated, a grim roll call of modern conflicts. Most recently, in 2024 and continuing into this year, Diego Garcia played a crucial role in launching strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. It was instrumental in facilitating so-called humanitarian missions to Gaza, a bitter irony given the island's own history of forced depopulation. Going further back, its runways were vital during the invasion and occupation of Afghanistan from 2001 onwards. This single island allows the United States and the United Kingdom to exert influence across the Middle East, East Africa and South Asia, a critical node in their global military network. The strategic calculus is stark. Without Diego Garcia, the capacity of both nations to project power in this crucial region would be significantly diminished. It offers an unparalleled logistical hub free from the political complexities and potential instability of mainland bases in other countries. This is why its continued, uninterrupted operation was paramount in the negotiations with Mauritius. Sovereignty may have been conceded in name, but the operational control, the military imperative, remains firmly in the hands of its long-term users. The island is, in effect, a permanent aircraft carrier, unsinkable and largely unaccountable. The agreement, therefore, is less about the return of land and more about securing the future of this military fortress. The discussions, though framed around Mauritian sovereignty, were undoubtedly dominated by the need to ensure that the base's functions would not be impeded. The United States, the primary operator, watched these negotiations with keen interest, its strategic posture in the Indian Ocean hanging in the balance. The value of Diego Garcia is measured not in pounds or dollars, but in its capacity to deliver overwhelming force and maintain surveillance over a critical intersection of global trade and political fault lines. The newly inked agreement stipulates that the Diego Garcia base will now be leased from Mauritius. This is not a short-term arrangement. The lease is set for a formidable 99 years. Such a duration speaks volumes about the long-term strategic calculations at play. It effectively ensures that, for generations to come, the military facility will continue its operations under a new landlord, yet with the same tenants and the same overarching purpose. This lengthy tenure offers a veneer of Mauritian sovereignty while cementing the Anglo-American military presence for the foreseeable future, pushing any genuine return for the Chagossians even further into the distant horizon. Financially, the United Kingdom has committed to paying Mauritius an average of £101 million per year. This annual payment, when calculated over the entire 99-year lease period, amounts to a staggering £3.4 billion, or approximately $4.35 billion. This is a significant sum, presented by some as a fair recompense for Mauritian sovereignty. However, it must be viewed in the context of the immense strategic value of the base and the decades of dispossession. For the UK, Prime Minister Starmer even suggested this cost was less than operating an aircraft carrier annually, perhaps a way to frame it as a bargain for continued military capability. Beyond the initial 99-year term, the agreement reportedly includes provisions for a potential 50-year extension. This clause further underscores the intention to maintain the status quo at Diego Garcia for well over a century. Furthermore, the UK has secured a right of first refusal thereafter, meaning that should Mauritius ever consider leasing the base to another power, the UK would have the priority option to renew its own terms. These clauses effectively lock in British and, by extension, American strategic interests for an almost indefinite period, making the transfer of sovereignty seem more symbolic than substantive in practical military terms. Crucially, while the UK shoulders the lease payments to Mauritius, the operational costs of the Diego Garcia base itself will be borne by the United States. Prime Minister Starmer highlighted that these operational costs significantly exceed the UK's financial contribution under the lease. This arrangement reveals the intricate partnership at play. The UK acts as the formal lessee and historical colonial power, absolving a territorial dispute, while the US finances the actual running of the base, its primary beneficiary. It's a convenient distribution of responsibilities, ensuring the military machine continues to run smoothly, financed by the American taxpayer on land now nominally Mauritian. The British government's decision to finally transfer sovereignty over the Chagos Islands was not born from a sudden moral awakening. Prime Minister Keir Starmer himself alluded to the complex and largely hidden reasons behind this shift. He stated that a full assessment of the motivations was highly classified. This veil of secrecy naturally fuels speculation and deepens mistrust, particularly among those who have suffered most directly from Britain's long occupation of the islands. When governments speak of national security to justify withholding information, it often means they are shielding themselves from embarrassment or accountability for past actions. One of the primary, albeit officially understated, drivers appears to be the increasing likelihood of a significant legal defeat for the United Kingdom in international courts. For years, Britain has faced mounting condemnation and adverse rulings regarding its continued administration of the Chagos Archipelago. International bodies have repeatedly affirmed that the detachment of the islands from Mauritius in 1965 was unlawful. The prospect of further legal battles culminating in a potentially damning judgment and the imposition of punitive damages likely weighed heavily on the minds of policymakers in London. This deal, therefore, can be seen as a preemptive move to mitigate a far worse outcome. Without a settlement, the UK risked not only financial penalties, but also significant reputational damage on the global stage. The continued claim over the Chagos Islands was becoming an untenable colonial anachronism, a stark contradiction to Britain's professed commitment to international law and self-determination. The pressure from Mauritius, bolstered by widespread international support, was becoming relentless. This agreement allows the UK to frame the transfer as a bilateral resolution, a responsible step, rather than a capitulation forced by international legal sanction. It is an exercise in damage control, dressed up as diplomacy. The highly classified nature of the full reasoning also hints at the strategic calculations involving the United States. Maintaining the operational integrity of Diego Garcia was undoubtedly a non-negotiable element for both London and Washington. Any unravelling of British control without a secure alternative for the base would have created a strategic vacuum. Thus, the deal needed to satisfy American requirements for uninterrupted access and operational freedom. The secrecy likely conceals the delicate negotiations and compromises made to ensure that the military utility of Diego Garcia remained untouched, regardless of which flag flew over the islands. Section 5. A fleeting victory, the High Court drama and a people's unheard plea. Just as the ink was poised to dry on the controversial deal, a dramatic legal challenge emerged from the very people whose lives have been defined by the Chagos tragedy. On Thursday, the 22nd of May, the day of the signing, a last-minute injunction was sought in a London High Court. This legal action was bravely brought forward by Bernadette Dugas and Beatrice Pompey, British nationals who were born on Diego Garcia before the brutal expulsions. Their argument was clear and morally compelling. The Chagossian community, the true victims of this long saga, had not been adequately consulted about a deal that would determine the fate of their homeland. The initial granting of the injunction by Justice Goose offered a momentary flicker of hope, a brief pause in the seemingly inexorable march of state power. It suggested that perhaps the voices of the dispossessed might finally be heard in a British court of law. However, this hope was short-lived. The government, represented by James ADKC for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, conveyed an urgent message from Number 10. A decision was needed by 1 p.m. that day if the signing was to proceed. The pressure was immense, the machinery of state determined to push the agreement through without further delay. Later that same day, Justice Chamberlain delivered his ruling, overturning the stay. He concluded that the injunction should be discharged, allowing the deal to proceed immediately. His words, "The agreement can be concluded today and it does not necessarily have to be at 9 o'clock," sealed the fate of the legal challenge. While the intricacies of the legal arguments are complex, the outcome was painfully familiar to the Chagossians. Their concerns, their fundamental right to be involved in decisions about their ancestral lands, were once again overridden by perceived matters of state and geopolitical expediency. The High Court's decision, while legally binding, did little to address the profound sense of injustice felt by the Chagossian plaintiffs and the wider community. It highlighted the immense difficulty of challenging government actions when national security and pre-agreed international treaties are invoked. The legal system in this instance ultimately facilitated the government's agenda, rather than providing a robust check on its power, or a genuine avenue for redress for a community systematically wronged for decades. The courtroom drama ended, but the deeper injustice endures, a persistent stain on Britain's conscience. Section 6. Echoes of Exile, the Chagossian diaspora's anguished cry for justice. The reaction from many within the Chagossian diaspora to the UK-Mauritius deal has been one of profound disappointment, anger and a renewed sense of betrayal. These are people who were forcibly removed from their homes over half a century ago, their lives irrevocably shattered by a callous act of colonial expediency to make way for the Diego Garcia military base. Scattered across the globe, primarily in the UK, Mauritius and Seychelles, they have fought for decades for the right to return, for recognition of their suffering and for a say in the future of their homeland. This agreement, negotiated largely above their heads, feels like yet another chapter in their long history of dispossession. A core grievance is the conspicuous lack of meaningful consultation with the Chagossian community itself. While governments in London and Port Louis finalised the terms, the people whose heritage is intrinsically linked to these islands were largely excluded from the process. Decisions about sovereignty, about lease terms, about the very future of the land from which they were exiled were made without their substantive input. This exclusion is not merely a procedural oversight. It is a continuation of the dehumanizing treatment that has characterized their plight since the 1960s and 70s. Their voices, their aspirations, remain secondary to strategic interests. The financial aspects of the deal, while significant for Mauritius, offer little direct solace or redress to the displaced islanders. The £3.4 billion lease payment is a state-to-state transaction. Concerns abound within the Chagossian community about how, or if, any of this financial arrangement will translate into tangible benefits for them, such as compensation, support for resettlement, or investment in their communities in exile. There is a deep-seated fear that they will once again be forgotten, their specific claims for justice and restitution overshadowed by the broader geopolitical settlement between the two nations. The UK government, in its defence of the deal, has stated it is the right thing to protect the British people and the country's national security. Such pronouncements, however, sidestep the fundamental moral questions about the historical injustice inflicted upon the Chagossians. For them, national security has long been the justification for their suffering. Their desire is not to undermine legitimate security concerns, but to have their human rights, including the right of return, acknowledged and meaningfully addressed. The current agreement, in the eyes of many Chagossians, fails to achieve this crucial balance, perpetuating their exile under a new administrative arrangement. Section 7. The Scar of 1965. How Britain severed the Chagos Archipelago from its roots. To comprehend the depth of Chagossian anguish and the complexities of the current deal, one must look back to 1965. In that year, with Mauritius still a British colony and marching towards independence, the United Kingdom made a fateful, and many argue illegal, decision. Britain administratively detached the Chagos Islands from Mauritius, creating a new entity known as the British Indian Ocean Territory, or BIOT. This act was not one of benevolence or careful decolonization. It was a calculated move designed to secure the islands, particularly Diego Garcia, for strategic military purposes in collusion with the United States. This detachment occurred just 3 years before Mauritius gained its independence in 1968. Mauritian leaders at the time claimed they were coerced into agreeing to the separation, with the promise of independence being contingent on ceding the Chagos Archipelago. This historical context is crucial, as it forms the basis of Mauritius's long-standing claim that the detachment was unlawful under international law, which prohibits the dismemberment of colonial territories prior to independence. The creation of BIOT was, in essence, the birth of a new colonial possession, specifically tailored to host a military base, free from the oversight of a newly independent nation. Following the creation of BIOT, the grim process of depopulation began. Between 1968 and 1973, the entire Chagossian population, indigenous inhabitants with a unique culture and history, were forcibly removed from their homes. They were herded onto overcrowded ships, offered minimal compensation, and dumped in Mauritius and Seychelles, left to fend for themselves in poverty and despair. Their pets were gassed, their way of life destroyed. This brutal act was carried out in secret to ensure that Diego Garcia could be swept and sanitized for its new military role, a chilling testament to the ruthlessness of Cold War geopolitics. The legacy of this 1965 decision has haunted British foreign policy and the lives of the Chagossians ever since. International courts and tribunals, including the International Court of Justice, have subsequently affirmed that the decolonization of Mauritius was not lawfully completed and that the UK is under an obligation to end its administration of the Chagos Archipelago. The recent deal, therefore, can be seen as a belated and strategically managed acknowledgement of this historical wrong, though questions remain about whether it truly delivers justice or merely reshapes the contours of control. The scar of 1965 is deep, and this new agreement is but the latest attempt to dress a wound that has never properly healed. Section 8. Washington's nod. American endorsement and enduring strategic imperatives. The United States, though not a direct signatory to the sovereignty transfer agreement between the UK and Mauritius, has been an omnipresent and influential stakeholder throughout this entire saga. The Diego Garcia military base is, first and foremost, an American strategic asset operated with British cooperation. Consequently, Washington's approval, or at least acquiescence, was a critical prerequisite for any deal to proceed. The fact that the agreement safeguards the continued operation of the base under terms acceptable to the US underscores the immense leverage exerted by American strategic interests in the region. Political support for the new arrangement has notably come from both sides of the American political spectrum. Former US President Donald Trump publicly welcomed the deal in February of this year, or perhaps late 2024, following a meeting with Keir Starmer, who was then leader of the opposition. This endorsement from a figure often skeptical of international agreements signaled a bipartisan consensus in Washington regarding the importance of securing Diego Garcia's future. Trump's predecessor, Joe Biden, had also reportedly backed the agreement, indicating a consistent American policy aimed at preserving the base's functionality irrespective of who holds nominal sovereignty. This American backing is hardly surprising. Diego Garcia's strategic value to the US military is immense, providing an unparalleled platform for operations across the Indian Ocean, the Middle East and beyond. Any disruption to this facility would have significant implications for America's global defense posture. Therefore, the primary concern for Washington was ensuring that any transfer of sovereignty from the UK to Mauritius would not impede or complicate US military activities. The 99-year lease, with the US covering operational costs, effectively achieves this objective, maintaining the status quo in practical military terms. The involvement, however indirect, of figures like Trump and Biden highlights the geopolitical weight of Diego Garcia. It transcends simple bilateral relations between the UK and Mauritius, drawing in the world's foremost superpower. The US desire for stability and continued access to the base likely acted as a powerful catalyst for the UK to find a resolution with Mauritius, especially in the face of mounting international legal pressure. Washington's quiet diplomacy and overt support have helped shape an agreement that, while addressing Mauritian sovereignty claims, primarily serves to perpetuate American strategic dominance in a critical part of the world. Section 9, the long shadow future implications for regional order and unsettled debts. This landmark agreement, signed yesterday, undoubtedly marks a significant shift in the political cartography of the Indian Ocean. The transfer of sovereignty over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, after decades of dispute, has the potential to recalibrate regional dynamics and alter the nature of international relations concerning post-colonial territorial claims. For UK-Mauritius relations, it could herald an era of improved cooperation, moving past a bitter legacy that has long soured diplomatic ties. However, the true test will be in the implementation and whether it genuinely fosters mutual respect or simply papers over deep-seated historical grievances with a veneer of financial settlement. The long-term impact on regional stability is a complex calculation. On one hand, resolving a protracted sovereignty dispute could be seen as a positive step, removing a point of contention, yet the continued and indeed extended presence of a major foreign military base, now under a new leasing arrangement, will remain a focal point for powers wary of Anglo-American influence in the region. The 99-year lease for Diego Garcia ensures that the strategic landscape in military terms remains largely unchanged, potentially disappointing those nations who hope for a demilitarization or a reduction in superpower presence in the Indian Ocean. For these Chagossian people, the implications are perhaps the most profound and deeply personal. While the agreement acknowledges Mauritian sovereignty, it does not automatically guarantee their right to return to all islands, nor does it specify clear mechanisms for restitution or compensation for the decades of forced exile and suffering. Their struggle for justice, for their voices to be truly heard and their rights fully restored, is far from over. The deal risks becoming another chapter, where their plight is a footnote to larger geopolitical maneuvers, their homeland a bargaining chip in a game played by powerful states. The question of whether this deal brings them closer to freedom or merely changes their overlords remains painfully open. Ultimately, the £3.4 billion Chagos deal will cast a long shadow. It is a testament to the enduring power of strategic interests and the slow, often compromised path towards addressing colonial injustices. While it may resolve a legal and diplomatic impasse for the UK and offer financial and symbolic gains for Mauritius, its success will be measured by future generations on whether it delivered true justice for the dispossessed, fostered genuine regional stability based on equity, and truly closed a dark chapter of history? Or will it simply be remembered as a clever rearrangement of an old order, the echoes of empire still resonating across the turquoise waters?